Room. And there goes quorum out the door. He just left. Oh, so close. Okay, we have regained quorum. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the General Issues Committee for February 13th, 2020. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we have an added 7.11, savings generated from funded projects, FCS 215.
Thank you. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Marula. All in favor? Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. On to discussion items. Our first item is 7.1, sidewalk snow removal, deferred from the January 28th GIC. Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. And this has been a journey for me, and I think for a lot of other people. We had some great presentations at the budget hearing committees the other day, and I'm sensitive to and mindful of some of the comments that we heard there about accessibility. And at the same time, I've heard some good points made by Councillor Marula and others in terms of what may be the best way to proceed here, given that majority of our residents out there are presumptively doing the right thing. And so how do we deal with that? And so I had the opportunity, and I shared with you to have a brief word with Rick Hansen at the Big City Mayors Conference. He obviously runs a national organization that looks at accessibility for residents in all of its forms, and I shared that information with you. And one of the hallmarks of their information was to improve snow clearing in municipalities. I don't think he said make it universal or make it mandatory city work, but improvements are important, and how we do that and how do we get to that, I think, is important as well. What I can share with you, when I polled the big city mayors, and I know we did a comparison in Ontario, but I can share with you that the mayors across the country responded to a verbal and an email poll that I did of them, asking them what they do in their municipalities, and I'll just give you a quick rundown here, and I think that comparison is informative. So Calgary does full snow clearing with outside contractors, and they told me that they use outside contractors because they're then liable for any damages that they do, so they're more careful when they do it, but they do all of the city streets. Windsor does some, but not only on municipal property, so they do what we do pretty much. London does all, London, Ontario. Toronto does all, whenever it is mechanically possible to do, which is their moniker, but they do all. Montreal does all. Gatineau does some, and that some includes most of the municipal properties, bus stops, and regional roads. Laval does the same, and St. John's does all their streets, and those are the ones that responded. So I'm wondering what they know that we don't know for the ones that do it all. And I am mindful of the fact that we do have a majority of citizens that are doing the right thing in our community, and so how do we kind of work through that process, given that there are folks in our community that have challenges when they're challenged in terms of their mobility through the wintertime when people don't clear the snow. So at the appropriate time, I'll come, if you'll come back to me. I mean, I know I've spoken already. I have a motion, and I've distributed that, to ask our staff to do more research and advise with the advisory, or work with the Advisory Committee for Disabilities, Seniors Advisory Committee, any other committees or external groups that have delegated before us. And I'm mindful of moms, somebody might mention that. It seems to be, a pretty broad organization that has probably good data in terms of what happens there. So if someone wants to amend this, to add that'd be fabulous. And that we bring that back by August of next year to make an ultimate decision. And I think the assessment really needs to be, which one actually makes us better off for not us, but for the folks that are mobility challenged in our community. I think the speed at which most people get at their snow clearing and how effectively they do it is almost instantaneous when the snow flies. For those that don't bother, that's where the problem lies. If we're to do it by contract, my sense of it would be that it would take longer and would not be as efficient and as clear as the residents might make it happen. So I think those are issues that we're going to have to weigh on. But I think it's still important to proceed on getting better analysis to determine whether or not there's some or all that we need to do. And when I say some, I think about our transit corridors and our regional connector arterial roads, and obviously those are areas that we want to promote mobility and promote people walking, promote people taking the bus, promote people taking riding their bikes. Should we, put an extra amount of attention and care into those spaces into the future to ensure that they have that level of mobility going forward. So clearly, many municipalities in the country are doing what some are advocating that we should do. And I think that's worthy of, some deeper analysis and some continued dialogue with the groups that are concerned about this, and some assessment as to, how might they be better off, and would a contract delay actually not improve their mobility and take them longer to get to where they need to go, as opposed to letting the residents continue to do work and encourage the ones that don't do it properly to do more. So having said all that, Mr. Chair, I think it's an important issue. I thank the staff for all the documentation they've provided so far. I think there's an opportunity to do a little bit more work on assessing what other municipalities across the country do and how they are impacted by that and how that impacts their mobility challenged citizens in their community, and then come back next year to make a decision as to how we proceed. So at the appropriate time, I will move the motion I have here. If you deem this to be appropriate time, I can do that, seconded by Councilor Marula, or I can wait till everyone speaks.
We do have a speakers list, so I prefer to go through their speakers list on the report, and then you can put your motion on the table after we've exhausted our speakers. So discussion on item 7.1, the sidewalk snow removal report. We'll continue with our speakers. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just had a quick question procedurally. Would our questioning also be appropriate for the information report that we received via email related to the item as well?
Madam Clerk.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the information update is not before you, unfortunately. I'm sure if you ask questions of staff, I don't have the information update here. It's not something that's on the agenda. So I don't even know what the content is. I haven't seen it.
That's fine. I'll just go through the questions then. Thank you for the procedural clarity. Thank you to staff through the chair for preparing the report. Several questions related to the original report and supplementary. So just wanted to get a sense of our current kind of resident engagement in clearing the sidewalks, and if there is anyone from the staff team who might be able to respond to how many complaints related to sidewalk clearing bylaw received in the past winter season, not this one that we're currently in, but the winter before, given that we're still in this one.
Through the Deputy Mayor, it's Ken Leendertz. The 2018, we received 1,874 complaints that we investigated and laid orders on 142 properties. And in 19, we received 3,622 complaints. Violation orders were 1,803, and so that's where we are today.
Okay, so it correlates to obviously the amount of snow that we receive in a winter season. I appreciate that. Through the chair, Ken, if you could please, when we do, as a city, move to orders and or move to actually clearing the sidewalks on behalf of the residents who aren't complying and then do the chargeback, are we covering all of the costs, or are we operating that fee chargeback to residents at a loss?
Through the chair, well, we actually do fees for service. So what traditionally happens is after a significant snowfall, we'll go out 24 hours afterwards, and we will give an order if, in fact, they haven't complied with the bylaw. And then if we return within 24 hours of that order, and they have not completed the work, we actually put fees for service on their property, and then we contact the contractor. The contractors will come in, and they also, the fees that we pay the contractor are also put on the tax roll. So it is a cost recovery on the work that we do.
So just to be clear through the chair, 100% cost recovery, there's no additional operation loss or funds that aren't accounted for through the chargeback? So 100% cost recovery?
Through the chair, it's hard to determine because there's over about 50 different bylaws that we do, but traditionally the fees for service is calculated on the amount of work that is done on each specific event. So the fact that the officer has to record the incident, the fact that the officer has to go and do a site visit, has to do a re-inspection, and then the follow-up on that, the fees of service are basically calculated on that. So traditionally on the event, I would say it is full cost recovery, but to be specific, I'd be unable to tell you that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Through the chair, just a couple of other questions. Ken, that's it for bylaw that I had. To Director Saldo, if I may, through the chair, could you please comment about our current standard of service delivery as it relates to snow clearing vis-a-vis any minimum maintenance standards via Ontario regulation? Are we meeting standards on what we do clear?
Thank you. Through the Chair, to the councillor. The city maintains currently about just under 400 lane kilometers of sidewalk throughout the city, and it's primarily on properties that we own along parks. We also maintain it on behalf of the school board on a chargeback basis. Those are some of the criteria that we maintain those sidewalks. In terms of the standard we apply, I believe it's activation at 8 snow cover, and we do use material to make those sidewalks bare, either through a mix of sand or salt, or in some locations salt itself. So that would meet the current minimum maintenance standards that were identified or changed in May of 2018.
And if you could, please, through the chair, comment on, so just want to talk through a little bit of on-the-ground current service level. So in Ward 3, there is a particular section, which many of the councillors are aware of. It's part of the stadium precinct. We have a brand-new high school there, the Bernie Custis High School. We've got the exceptional new Bernie Morelli Community Center. We've got a HSR stop right there as well. So currently, my understanding is that the HSR stop gets cleared by road staff and or via contract. Our community center gets cleared vis-a-vis, or it's a city facility, so we're responsible for clearing it. And then there's a chargeback for the high school. But the experience on the street is that the stop gets done first, then the swath of sidewalk leading to the community center is not done, and then the community center is done, and then the high school property gets done. So as residents are trying to, A, make it to the school, 2, make it to the community center, 3, get from the bus stop to where they need to get to, there is an inconsistency of service level right now. Could you comment on, is there a current consistency in our standard of service delivery on the sidewalks that we are responsible for?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. And I'll start off by sort of discussing in terms of, there's the right-of-way where the minimum maintenance standards apply, and then there is private property. So private property would be the facility that we own. And the standard that we follow for those are different. The standard along the right-of-way would follow the minimum maintenance standard, while the standard that is applied to the private property is dealing more with the sorry, I'm trying to find it here. The Occupiers Liability Act, sorry. So that is a different standard. The Occupiers Liability Act actually is a higher standard than minimum maintenance standards. We tend to get out there for most of our facilities and have it to bare pavement at a sooner time frame. You are correct. The sidewalks are done utilizing a route that we would have created in terms of optimizing, trying to clear it as quickly as possible. The bus stops are done by road staff on behalf of transit through a contractor. And depending on where they fall within the routing, they may occur sooner or later versus the sidewalk itself.
Okay, thank you. Previously, when we had the report before us and prior to it being deferred, I was curious to hear about our HSR survey and whether or not there was any feedback from our ridership, our current ridership, regarding snow-covered walks and whether it deters residents from using public transit. Through the chair, is there staff who could comment on what we've learned through the survey process in terms of potential impact on ridership by not having consistent sidewalk clearing?
So through the chair to the councillor, we did have this discussion with our colleagues in HSR, and they did provide us with some input. Currently, right now, we have about 419,000 residents that are within 400 meters of a transit stop. And through the survey, customers did indicate that weather protection at bus stops was a very important issue for them. and it's one that they're not currently satisfied with. And that could be interpreted in a number of ways. The access to the bus stops via the sidewalks during snow weather. It's a consistent theme that they're having difficulties in terms of getting to the bus stops themselves. There are instances where uncleared sidewalks are particularly challenging for those with mobility needs, people with disabilities, seniors, and those with strollers and young children. So we've heard from our customers that after snowfall, it is quite difficult for them to get to the transit stop.
And would it be safe to say through you, Chair, that our ridership numbers are impacted by our current level of service in a negative way?
Through the chair to councillor, I think it'd be fair to say that the inability to potentially get to the bus stop does have an impact in terms of residents making a decision, will they use the transit service or not, given any snow event.
Thank you. And in terms of our services, has there ever been services, i.e. our community centers and facilities where we offer services to our residents, has there ever been an assessment based on seasonal attendance and or what might hinder residents from attending? Has that kind of consultation or feedback been received to the city system in any capacity?
Through the chair to councillor, that's something we can follow up with our colleagues at HSR. I don't have that information.
HSR, or I guess it might be a question to consider for rec centers and community centers and all the other services that we provide through city facilities. So it was really clear to me through Public Delegation Day, Mr. Chair, that the impact is real. The current service level is impacting our residents in a negative way and disproportionately impacting folks with disabilities, parents who need to push strollers, our senior population, as well as just able-bodied residents who have to make the gambled choice every day during snow days about whether they walk on the sidewalk versus a cleared roadway. So the risk of injury from a vehicle impact not being seen are significant impacts that we need to be factoring into making our decision. So I appreciate the motion that's before us. I also want to say that the original motion did request that kind of information in terms of an EDI lens on how residents are impacted by our current level of service and how we may be able to address it. It's clear to me that we need to make a decision that's not only around fiscal management, but fundamentally about providing a service to our residents so that they can move freely in our city and get to the services that they rely on, and ensuring that we're not creating undue hardship on the most marginalized residents. So I appreciate the motion that's before us. When it gets to that, I'll be happy to speak to it some more. That's my questions for right now. Thank you.
Councillor Pearson.
Questions, correct, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Thank you.
On the report, please.
So if I could to Mr. Leendertz, I'll give him an opportunity to come back down. Sorry, I couldn't give you a heads up there. So my question is understanding bylaw enforcement. Can you elaborate on the issues that bylaw have? Because I know I have it in dealing with residents. When we have a snow event, as we're having right now, and this could possibly stop in about an hour and start back up 2 hours from now. The unknown that residents don't realize that the clock starts ticking again after the final snowfall. Could you clarify, how does bylaw deal with this?
Through the chair, that's correct. That's certainly one thing we experienced last year is that the snow events that happened every 12 hours, and the 24-hour clock doesn't start until the snowfall finishes. So once the snowfall finishes after 24 hours, then we'll go out and give out warnings and educate, and then, of course, go for orders after that. If, in fact, we have another snow, even in the middle of enforcement, we stop enforcement. So if we're out there and it starts to snow, the clock starts again.
Thank you for that. And how do we handle, because I get the calls, is we're enforcing on public, maybe commercial properties, residential properties, and I get the comment, but the city hasn't cleaned theirs yet. So do we have the position where not until our city properties and responsibilities are addressed that we go after bylaw enforcement for everyone else, or did we just begin?
Through the chair, traditionally we wait till the Public Works has completed theirs because obviously one of the big concerns we have is the snowplow came by and filled up my sidewalk. And so we use a lot of discretion in that area, but it is all hands on deck with my entire team after a snow event so that we can actually get out there and educate is our first tool and then look for a compliance after that. So we're not about going out there and getting the contractor out because that's going to take 2 or 3 days anyways because the contractors get swarmed out. But the idea is to work with Public Works and then, of course, go out there and enforce.
Thank you, and I appreciate you clarifying that it could be 2 or 3 days before a contractor even goes out there. Thank you for that. And we also have the issue, and it may not be a question to you, Mr. Leenders, but to Mr. Soldo, is we do have issues. I'm sure Public Works gets the complaints. When the plows do go by, somebody has cleared off the sidewalk, and now they have boulders and snow that's been pushed back up against the sidewalks. Has this is an issue? Has it been a major issue in the last year or so? Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Through the chair to the councillor, that situation is problematic when you have a sidewalk that's curb face sidewalk right beside the roadway. The snow has to go somewhere. And when we plow the roadway, it usually ends up on the sidewalk, potentially filling in after someone has already cleaned that sidewalk. What we would do if there's a significant amount of accumulation on that sidewalk, we'd have to come back and remove the snow. But that is an operation we would undertake after we've cleaned all the other roadways.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the clarification on those points, and because it is an issue. And I'd be curious as to how many locations we do go back on. I know there's a number in Stony Creek in Ward 10, because I put the calls in on the major roadways, being Grays Road, Millen Road especially because not only are you clearing off for the lane, you're clearing off for the bike path. And double impact on the sidewalk then, which is a zero clearance. It's a curb face sidewalk. So appreciate the answers. Thank you. Maybe I might leave with staff, if there's an opportunity at some point, providing us with maybe the stats on how many times staff have to go back and clear sidewalks that have already been cleared by residents, because that is a financial impact on our budget. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. A process question first, if I may. So we've all received an email from Mr. Soldo. The beginning of the email in the information report, it says at the January 28th meeting, sidewalk snow removal report was deferred until February 13th. A number of questions regarding the report have been forwarded to staff, and the following provides a comprehensive response. I'm trying to understand why that information report is not on our agenda today. Because according to the clerk, if it's not on the agenda, we can't talk about it, nor does it become a public document.
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there is a difference between an information update and an information report. What staff sent out by email was an information update, which is just an email. It doesn't go on an agenda, it doesn't get officially received, and it's not before you for discussion. An information report gets put on the agenda, it's online for the public to view, and it is before you for discussion. That's the difference between the two.
So the question now stands to the city manager then. Why is this an information update when these were questions that were asked of staff? They're all questions that should be made available to the public, answers to the public, and yet it was only sent to us by email.
Through the Deputy Chair, I'm going to start on a generic process, and then I'll hand it over to Dan. My understanding, there has been a process here at the city where there are some questions asked of council that they prepare these information updates. Now, they are posted on the web, so they are made public and available. I'm not sure how that process started. It's something I'm getting up to speed on, but it is a public document. Now, I'll talk to Dan about why it was specifically done for this situation.
Can I ask where it's put on the web?
There's an information updates listing up, and Jason's just looking to make sure it's there, but all the ones you receive in that format do get posted on the web.
So is it there?
Might not be there just yet according to Jason's search, but he's looking. But it will be if it's not up yet.
Mr. McKinnon?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So some of the questions that Edward was addressing were raised in the last committee meeting, but some of them came in the intervening period of time. So it was just trying to respond to as many questions that as we could through the update, because we wouldn't have had time to follow the normal process for providing a report.
I guess I just find it frustrating that some of these questions were asked in the general issues meeting, and we received them as an update, and so they're not being sent out to the public via a general issues committee meeting where we can actually answer those and respond to those answers. And so I'm in a bit of a box because I have questions about these, but we're not supposed to talk about this report because it's not before us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and my apologies for that. It's just a timing issue.
Madam Clerk, did you want to add?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just for clarification, because we keep referring to it as a report, it's actually not a report, which is why it's not on an agenda. It originally began when there was a complaint last year that members of committee were receiving information directly through staff that they were using to consider matters that were before them that weren't being provided to the public because they weren't part of an agenda. So that should hopefully help Jeanette with her question there. That's why it originally happened. If you have questions regarding snow removal, you can certainly still ask those. Unfortunately, it's not a report, it's just an email. So it is difficult, and technically it's not before you.
Would there be an opportunity to amend that to what's before us so that publicly it's available with the minutes?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it's not on the agenda. It's not uploaded right now. If they got copies, you could add it as correspondence to the agenda. If you have questions, it's completely up to committee whether you want to ask those questions or not, but it is not a report that's before you. That's the difference between an update or not.
Thank you. So we have been asking questions on that were included in that information report. So if you do have questions, please feel free. Councillor?
I appreciate that very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So on the one section where we're talking, the report talks about liabilities exposure under the current system, and over the last 10 years, we've averaged $616,000 a year in sidewalk slip and fall claims. Is that solely about the winter, or is that throughout the entire 12-month period of time?
Good morning. Through the chair, yeah, that's directly related to winter.
That's winter only?
Winter slip and fall claims, yes.
Wow. Okay. That worked backwards on me. With regards to, we're talking about the number of kilometers of sidewalk per ward, and specifically in Ward 9, it shows 114 kilometers in that chart. Am I reading it correctly?
Through the chair, that the listing if we have 2,403 lane kilometers in the city. It's 2,397 kilometers in the urban area, and then we broke it down by ward. So in your ward, that is correct.
Now, is that 114 kilometers? Does any of those kilometers include the sidewalks that are already being plowed for municipal properties?
That is all the sidewalks in your ward, so that does include sidewalks that are covered for municipal property, sidewalks that are along school boards, all the other criteria that I spoke to previously.
So then if I wanted to ascertain what the cost would be in Ward 9 specific to residential sidewalks, excluding that municipal component, because we shouldn't be asking those residents to pay for it twice. If we're already clearing the municipal properties, then that would continue under the municipal property and under the levy. Now we're talking about simply adding the additional kilometers, that is the variance between the 114 minus the municipal. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Soldo?
Through the chair, that's correct. That is the protocol and the format that we follow when we're assigning that in the Ancaster area.
And do we have, I know I'd asked you about this, I don't know, maybe a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember when I asked, honestly. Do we have the numbers yet in terms of what the cost would be for Ward 9?
Through the chair to the councillor, I believe we identified the cost, but I'd have to look to my colleagues in finance if they've determined the numbers.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have a cost or impact per household if it were to be applied on the general levy or area rated, and I could share that information with respect to each of the wards, but specific to Ward 9. And so I think I'll have a total of 4 scenarios. So under scenario 2, if it were to be applied general levy, so effectively not area rating. General levy is that all properties pay for sidewalk snow removal. The impact on an average household in Ward 9, and I apologize, I don't have the average assessment for Ward 9 on hand, but the impact would be about $8 per property. So again, urban and rural, because it's no longer area rated if it were to be applied against a general levy. If it were to be area rated urban versus rural in Ward 9, the impact for a urban property, and urban would be defined by the transit boundary within Ward 9, the impact would be $9 for an average household. So again, apologize, I don't have the average assessment for Ward 9 on hand, but it would be, that $9 would be based on an average assessed property in Ward 9.
And so if I can ask for clarification, so the $8 is on the general levy, that means everyone in the city is getting that snow clearing, and our component in Ward 9 would be $8 per household?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, and so we typically provide this type of analysis. I just want to highlight if council chose to proceed with sidewalk snow clearing and you chose to proceed with applying it on the general levy, I just want to highlight that would not be consistent with area rating of sidewalks. Just as a reminder, we do area rate sidewalks, so this isn't sidewalk snow clearing. We area rate sidewalks urban rural. So rural property owners, based on the transit boundary, do not pay for sidewalks currently.
Yep, I understand that. And so then if we were to simply area rate it for Ward 9 residents only, exclusive of everyone else, it's $9 per household in the urban area.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is a policy. That raises a policy issue. We currently area rate under a number of scenarios. We area rate urban rural. We area rate fire according to a different geographic boundary. Where we have restrictions with respect to the act is we cannot necessarily area rate by ward. What the act restricts is where there is a different level of service or a different service, you can area rate it. So if the scenario is we start picking and choosing different service levels across wards, or we only charge certain wards, it can become problematic. So we've done this in the case of Ancaster because they're unique in that they receive a service that other parts of the city do not receive. So I just want to highlight, as Councillor Clark asked, if we were to just area rate this to Ward 9, is we would need to work with Public Works just to determine what the level of service that Ward 9 would be receiving for snow removal. And has been highlighted already, there are certain parts of the city, whether it's on public lands or transit areas, that currently receive snow removal. So just a caution, if the intent is to define different service levels across the various wards and to area rate accordingly, we would just need to take that back to ensure we are on side with the Municipal Act.
And so I'm citing Ancaster as the precedent. What is so unique about Ancaster that they can area rate snow clearing of sidewalks, whereas in Ward 9, Upper Stony Creek, we cannot?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it's not that Ancaster is unique, the level of service. So Ancaster receives a level of service that the rest of the municipality currently does not receive. I'm not trying to, I'm not suggesting that if that were to be extended to Ward 9, that would become problematic. What may become problematic if different levels of service are determined across the various wards, that can become problematic as it relates to the rationale for area rating. So it's just something we would want to be able to take back and review against the Act.
Okay, and I'm not trying to belabor it, but I'm still a little bit confused as to the level of service that's unique to Ancaster.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think what I'm trying to refer to is if, for instance, the standard was snow removal 48 hours after a minimum 8 centimeter in one ward versus snow removal 48 hours after 10 centimeters of snow removal after 24 hours, after 5 centimeters. If that's the level of variation that council may choose, that may become a bit problematic as it relates to defending it against the regulations. So those are considerations that we just want to monitor as committee deliberates with respect to sidewalk snow removal.
Excuse me. So to be clear, you don't know whether or not we can area rate in Ward 9 or not?
So through the chair, the short answer would be yes, because it would be subject on the service levels that may be preferred ward by ward. So it would be determined based on your deliberations around service levels. And if the approach is to go ward by ward and not to make this more complicated, but if it were to go ward by ward and now you're choosing boundaries, urban-rural boundaries, ward by ward, that makes it a little more challenging as well.
Thank you. I'm glad you're back here today. I hope you're feeling better. Can I ask, is it possible as a municipality to run an online poll of all the residents citywide on the issue on our website? I mean, we're interpreting as a council to the best of our ability the intentions, the desires of our residents as to whether or not they're willing to pay, in my case, $8 a year per household for snow clearing. Can we not ask the residents on an online poll and advertise that poll and have them tell us what they think? Citywide, not in my ward specific, but citywide.
Through you, Deputy Chair, we can certainly do that. The challenge always with those types of surveys is making sure we get statistically significant if that's important. But we do that regularly for others, and we can, do extra promotion to try to get significant numbers. But it won't be the same as the kind of survey we do to get clients' SAT survey that we do across the city, where we really make sure we get statistically significant results per ward. That's quite expensive and labor intensive to do, but a general survey with a lot of promotion we can definitely do.
Not everyone has websites, Councillor. And so we could promote it through the media, and whatever comes back after 30 days, whatever the case is, that's a general indication, and we can have the pollsters tell us in terms of the scientific validity of it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something that we could consider.
Through the chair, absolutely.
Thank you. Those are all my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I apologize. I started to take the ward councillor through scenarios, and we got off topic we stayed on topic, but got into the methodology. What I wasn't able to share was scenario 3 with respect to Ward 9. So I did share scenario 2 under the two options under scenario 3. So that would be the higher level of service, which represents, I believe, just short of $4 million in total costs. For Ward 9, again, if it was general levy, no longer area rated, all properties pay, the impact would be $17 for an average household, and that represents an impact of about 0.4%. And if it were to be area rated urban rural, Within Ward 9, the impact would be $19 per household, still about a 0.4% increase.
Thank you, General Manager. Yep.
Just why the difference, if we're diversifying it over a broader community, one would think that having it spread out over the larger community, the cost would be lower, as opposed to why the difference? Why area rating does it go higher?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is under the second scenario, which is area rating. Now you're not capturing rural property owners. So that's why the average impact goes from $14 for an urban, if it was area rated, or sorry, no longer area rated, everyone pays. If it's area rated, only on urban property owners in Ward 9 under scenario 3, the impact is $17. So it's additional $3 for an urban property because rural property owners are not paying.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to make sure I've understood what I've heard thus far. So I think what I've understood is that the City of Hamilton has a minimum maintenance standard when it comes to both roads and sidewalks. And I think what I've understood is that with the change in legislation and the report that came out, I think in 2018, two things, if I could get clarity on. The city and not the homeowner is liable for the state of repair for our sidewalks. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And the city and not the homeowner is, in being liable, is liable for the cost of any declared and proven injury on that infrastructure. Is that correct?
Sorry, could you ask that again, please?
Sure. We are the owners of the public infrastructure, which is the sidewalk, and we are liable for any injury, slip or fall that is proven to be related to the state of repair on that sidewalk. Is that correct?
That is correct if negligence is established, yes.
Yes, thank you. And as of 2018, we have a minimum maintenance standard for sidewalks. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And that minimum maintenance standard, which we have thus far set out, is that, I think Mr. Soldo said 8 centimeters. Is that correct?
Through the chair, it's that the snow accumulation cannot exceed 8 centimeters 48 hours after a snow accumulation ends.
Right, thank you. Thank you, that's very helpful. Could you, just to help me frame it and understand the issue of clearing itself, what presently is the standard that we set for our priority 1 and 2A roads and that of our residential roads in terms of snow accumulation and when clearance must be brought?
Through the chair, I'm assuming you're referring to current sidewalks.
I'm presently referring to, I'm trying to get Mr. Soldo, I'm trying to get a sense of a comparison. I think you've said within 48 hours, it's 8 centimeters. What is the minimum maintenance standard that we have applied to our roads? In this case, priority 1, priority 2A, and residential. And within what time?
So in terms, through the chair to the councillor, in terms of the roadways, there is different service levels based on the priority of roadway itself.
Right.
And I'm not referring to sidewalks. So priority 1 and 2 roads have a certain service level, priority 3 and 4, and all the way down to 5. I don't have the chart. Nope, sorry. So in terms of the service levels for roadways, priority 1 roadways, which are things like the link and the escarpment crossings, the service level there is 2.5 centimeters, and we have to complete that within 4 hours. And it works its way all the way down into residential, where our service level is 8 centimeters as the trigger. We get down to bare pavement in both of those standards, and that is within 24 hours. In terms of sidewalks that we currently clear, because we have about 397 sidewalks, lane kilometers of sidewalks we clear, it is basically when the snow is finished accumulating, we get out there and we clear in areas such as in Ancaster to bare pavement.
So I think it's fair to say, through you, Mr. Chair, that the standard that we have set out for our roads is both our responsibility time and our clearance threshold is tighter, and we have to clear more faster. Is that fair?
Through the chair, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you. So a question that's often asked of me, Mr. Chair, is understanding who does what in the city, and it's taken me a little bit of time. Further to Councillor Nan's point, I think what I heard is that within the city of Hamilton, our Parks Department are responsible for clearing within and adjacent to the boundaries of our public parks. Is that correct? Through you, Chair.
Through the chair to councillor, so within parks and on sidewalks that border onto a park staff normally clear that in terms of efficiencies, though, so we don't send 2 crews out to the same location.
Okay. Thank you. And do we have a minimum maintenance standard for that? Do you know, Mr. Soldo, through you, Deputy Mayor?
Through the chair to the councillor, within our parks, the standard is bare pavement. So we utilize sand and salt to get to a bare pavement on paved pathways.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I heard that. The paved pathways within our parks, the standard is bare, and the standard is, what is the time? I beg your pardon?
Through the chair, they would meet the minimum maintenance standards. They would be done within 48 hours.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to make sure, thank you, I heard the cost. I think I heard that we're paying in excess of just over $600,000 a year for slips and falls, proven slips and falls, in relation to our sidewalks in the winter. Is that correct? Through you, Deputy Mayor.
Through the chair, that's correct. That's the average payout over the last 10 years.
Okay. Okay. Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, if you could just remind me, what is the goal of the Re-Envision campaign as it relates to HSR?
You, Mr. Chair, the components of the Re-Envision campaign are seeking to understand the attitudes of riders and potential riders who might take the HSR. So essentially, it's understanding kind of where the community is with respect to if we want to increase ridership, what are the types of things that we need to do to do that. Obviously, frequency and reliability are a priority in that, but we wanted to understand other things that might appeal to potential riders, such as creating different route structure, but also the experience that they're having on the bus and their ability to get to the bus.
Okay. So thank you. So one of our strategic objectives as a corporation that we're spending time and resources is trying to understand how can we enhance ridership. But we've also heard, I think I heard Mr. McKinnon say, that we have received feedback thus far in our consultation that ridership, we may be undermining our own strategic objective by frustrating or limiting people's ability to get to their bus stop, because their bus stop may be cleared, but the sidewalk to get there maybe not. Is that what you have heard thus far again, Mr. McKinnon?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I don't know if we've heard it in such explicit terms, but I think the interpretation would be similar to the way you've described it.
Okay, thank you. If I could just turn my attention so I understand the financials in the report that was provided to us. So presently, we're paying $1.58 million to clear 397 kilometers of sidewalk. Is that correct? Through you, Deputy Mayor.
Through the chair, that is correct.
I'm an arts major, so just bear with me. And I think last year we had what we classified as 29 snow events that saw our trucks out and clearing. Is that correct? Through you, Deputy Mayor.
That's correct. In the winter of 18-19, last winter, we had 29 events that had activations over 5 centimeters.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soldo. So if I'm doing my math correctly, the cost of kilometer in our present arrangement is almost $4,000, $3,979.85 cost per kilometer. And that is the equivalent of $137.24 cost per kilometer per event. I won't ask Mr. Soldo to confirm that because these are my calculations. So under scenario 1, or scenario 2, beg your pardon, it's been confirmed that the current cost is $1.58 million, and the additional cost, if we tagged on the 783 kilometers, is $1.78 million. Is that correct, Mr. Soldo? Through you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. To go to priority 1 and 2 roadways
Yeah.
would result in an additional 783 lane kilometers of sidewalks being cleared at a range of 1.48 to 1.78 million. I do need to clarify that that does not include the cost of material.
Right.
If we were to apply material, that would be above and beyond that.
Just so I understand, when you say material, Mr. Soldo, through you, do you mean salt? Or what does that mean?
That's correct. Through the chair, the level of service that's proposed in the report before you here today is to have snowpack as the end result, not bare pavement.
Okay, thank you. So that is, if I do my math, 1.58, 1 plus 1.78 equals a total cost of, as you set out, of $3,360,000 for 1,180 kilometers. If for 29 snow events, that's $98.19 per kilometer. So it seems to me the cost is going down, and I imagine that is due to economies of scale, but I'm not sure. For scenario 2, your calculations showed for a total cost of 2,444 kilometers, it would cost about $5.4 million. Is that correct? Through you, Chair. For scenario 3.
That's correct.
Beg your pardon, thank you. So if I do my math, 5.36, that for 29 events costs $75 per kilometer. So in fact, the cost is going down the more we plow our sidewalks. From $137 at present to $75. Thank you. Is there someone on the front bench who is able to speak to me about further about slips and falls from a public health perspective? I have some questions. No, so I will add those comments during my my remarks. Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Danko. So can I just have a few questions myself. By the way, General Manager Zagaric, I was not one of the ones insisting that you should have been at council last night. So I just want you to know how much I cared about you, General Manager Zagaric. Anyways, you're a real trooper for showing up today, but in my humble opinion, you did not have to. You could have stayed in bed. Anyways, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to the General Manager, since he has graciously shown up today recovering. Okay. So, Mike, so that my memory is not failing me, one of the delegates rightly quoted me. She did a wonderful job presenting the other day on Monday, quoted me as saying around up to $50 from public statements I had made last term of council. So that I know that my memory isn't failing me, I seem to recall last time, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we had this debate, Public Works staff had given a general range of $30 to $50 per household. Through you to the General Manager of either Public Works or Finance. Can you help me with that, please? Mike or Dan?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, our recollection is that that was a ballpark figure, just taking approximately $3.5 million in costs, and if you were to distribute it against the number of properties, and it might have been assumed the number of properties was a little lower than our actual number of properties, that's how you would arrive at that figure. So again, that was just a ballpark figure.
Okay.
The numbers I've referenced this morning is based on more defined parameters, including assessment values and some area rating scenarios as well.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, so just so that for public consumption, it wasn't numbers that I had just pulled off the top of my head. Okay, now, with current reports and figures, Mike or Dan. So in answering Councillor Clark, let's stay with scenario 3. You're telling me that if it is all properties across the city, the average amount per home, per property, is $17, winter snow clearing for sidewalks. Through you, Deputy Mayor?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, under scenario 3, the average citywide and is $15, but please recognize that that is based on average assessment of $358,600 for the city. So that's an average, and it will vary ward by ward. If I just quickly glance at the range, it varies from a impact of $9 in Ward 3. Again, this is general levy, so no longer area rated. It ranges from $9 in Ward 3 to $22 in Ward 15, and that's a reflection of the difference in average assessed values in those two wards.
Okay, so assessments similar to property tax increases, Mike. So this mirrors that, where you've always showed us whatever, if we come in at 3% this year, hypothetically, that you've shown us ward by ward, it may be higher or lower based on property assessment. This would be similar then. It could be anywhere from $9 up to possibly $23, correct?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. So under scenario 3 is if winter sidewalk clearing was treated like any other non-area rated service, the cost per household will be impacted by assessment and tax rates. So again, it's important to note that while we provide average impacts, those averages will not only vary across the city, but they'll vary within wards as well. Because again, we can provide you with average ward assessed values, but again, there will be some that are higher within a ward and some that are lower based on their assessed values.
Okay, and to summarize, and to sum up what you have said, because I'm going to move on to a couple of other staff in their jurisdictions, Mike. So what I heard was scenario 3, all properties based on assessment from Ward 3 to Ward 15, low to high, can be anywhere from roughly 9 to 23. Were those numbers what I heard correctly, Mike, please?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, from $9 in Ward 3 to $22 in Ward 15. And again, under the general levy, and as I've referenced previously, this would include rural property owners as well.
Okay, thank you so much, General Manager Zagarek. Through you as the Director of MLE, Ken Leenders, please. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Senior Director Leenders of MLE. Ken, number of the delegates Monday showed us problem properties. And especially, I've got very little time. I have very little time or patience for commercial properties that have much more wherewithal of resources to clean and timely clean and remove snow. We saw one problem property which seemed consistently a problem property. Ken, once you're aware of a problem property, is there not something that you register with that property and you keep, if you will, staff keep a closer eye on that property based on a pattern of what's occurring there, instead of every time citizens who want access have to call in formally a complaint before it triggers MLE to proceed? Through you, Deputy Mayor, please.
Through to Deputy Mayor, that's an excellent question, Councillor. From that meeting that of all the concerns the other day, our team went out and went to all the problem streets and all the problem neighborhoods and actually went door to door offering education and an awareness of the rules and regulations of the snow clearing. And all those addresses, 468, have been recorded into our Amanda system, and that is their first warning. And so if in fact we have another event, snow event, and we will go to those streets. We've actually put them on our radar, and we will actually issue orders immediately if we find that problems. Now, in particular on problem areas, and we've had experience with this for long weeds and grass and on garbage and debris, we put them on our radar, and we proactively enforce these areas. So we hear you loud and clear, and the ones that are the trouble ones, we are going to proactively go after them rather than wait for a reactive response and respond to our community's concerns.
I commend, applaud, and compliment you, MLE Senior Director. That's great news to my ears, and I would even embolden you to do, and your staff to do even more aggressive enforcement in the future, especially when regular problem properties, Deputy Mayor Danko, have been brought to their attention. Good news. Thank you, Ken. To General Manager McKinnon. Dan, if we wanted to go with scenarios 2 or 3 eventually, whether now or with the mayor's motion, it would be a few months from now, how much equipment do you need to purchase roughly? How much? And I presume it's going to be mostly of the Bobcat type of equipment to do sidewalks. And how soon would you be able to purchase the amount of equipment you may need? Through you, Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I may ask Edward to add some color to this, but I think it would probably take an entire off-season in order to get the bidding community ready. The approach would likely be to use contractors for this. It's one way that we can try to defer some liability around this, but it would probably take the bidding community about a year to get prepared, and I'll look to Edward to see if he wants to add anything to that.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I want to drill down, but I'll let Director Soldo, if he wishes to add, please.
Thank you. Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor. It is intended to contract this service out. If the service was to be provided by the city, we would have to purchase almost $6 million worth of equipment in the front end, which is that is why we're looking at the alternative service delivery.
And Edward, that would be continuing on with what I believe your department has done with winter operations for years. Don't you do a hybrid of in-house clearing and contract through you, Deputy Mayor?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor, that is correct. We try to achieve a balance, looking at what's the most efficient manner to deliver the service.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Deputy Mayor, through you to Manager Al Fletcher, please. Al, if you could just grab a microphone on this, if you'd allow me, Deputy Mayor, to wander a bit, since we're still talking snow.
We've been wandering.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. You'll keep a human leash on me, okay, thank you. A lot has been made of the Snow Angels program, and Al, I want to commend you and your staff. Since you took over 5 years ago, the previous agency that did it, Deputy Mayor, for those that weren't around, it was wanting. Unfortunately, it was not a successful program at all, and that agency just didn't meet expectations. Al Fletcher, under Director Mader, has taken over the last 5 years and done a much, much more successful, better job. So, Al, a simple question. If I brought a request to you today, and this request met all your eligibility requirements, could you match that person tomorrow? Through you, Deputy Mayor?
Through the Deputy Mayor, I think Council would like a yes or a no answer to this. The issue is it's a volunteer-based program. So if a eligible person was brought to us tomorrow and we had opened the program to take on more people, we may or may not have a volunteer in proximity to that home to be able to clear the snow.
Okay, because I was intrigued by Director Soldo's report based on information your department gave him that you had like 90% success rate last winter, only 9 weren't matched, and I saw 207 volunteers for only 201 residents on the list. I went, yippee, I can bring Director Soldo some more of my seniors that are alone that desperately would love to stay in their homes with proper snow clearing. So through you, Deputy Mayor, to Al for a further comment on that when I saw 207 volunteers versus only left 201 on your list.
Through the Deputy Mayor, I guess first and foremost, we have great appreciation for the volunteers who do sign up and register and take on the role of the physical activity in the cold weather. Yes, we do have the numbers that the councillor was talking about. However, we match geographically and also based on what the interest is of the volunteer. So as an example, if in Ward 6, the councillor was to bring someone who is on the west portion of the neighborhood, and we know we have volunteers. The ones we have right now are actually on the east side. So it's actually about 2 kilometers from, could be potentially 2 kilometers from where the person lives, and they're not willing to travel that far. With a geographical match, we have volunteers in Stony Creek and West Mountain, but not have the residents who would be looking for that service in their neighborhood.
Oh, man, that almost makes me want to cry that you've got volunteers available, but the geography is not allowing them, and they have lives to lead. I get that, Deputy Mayor, but not allowed to travel, if you will, over to an area that has a greater demand for your program, Al. Al, is there any request you would make further to bolster and make more successful Snow Angels? Councillor Marilla and I have often talked about some financial incentives for the volunteers, like a stipend at the end of the winter season. Through you, Deputy Mayor, maybe for a quick comment from Al?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the councillor, anything is possible. What we have found to date, it is not the chosen volunteer role that a lot of people want. It's outside cold and it's physical. We've tried youth. They haven't been as reliable, although we have some that are excellent. We do provide some swag that's left over from earlier donations from Marks in a hat, gloves, and socks, who people are quick to pick them up. We do a volunteer appreciation event at the end of the year. The last couple of years, we bought Bulldogs tickets and food, and they've been well received. No one's asking for anything. I think the biggest thing that we try to promote is look after your neighbor. You don't have to be a snow angel. If there's someone in your neighborhood that needs help, look out your window and help them.
Okay, thank you, Al. Mr. Deputy Mayor, thanks for your indulgence. And to Director Soldo, I just want to give a shout out to my current superintendent of roads, John Searles, and his team. They do a great job to the best of their ability. Thank you.
Yes, John and his team are absolutely fantastic. Councillor Farr.
Well, a big shout out to Terry McCleary down here then. He's fantastic. Councillor Jackson actually hit on a few things with respect to enforcement, but through you to Ken, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to drill down on what I'm reading. On page 2 of 9 and what report is before us today, it says, quote, to enhance Sidewalk snow removal compliance staff recommend expanding the existing winter storm communications activities to focus more heavily on residents' responsibilities regarding removing snow from sidewalks adjacent to their property. I don't have an end quote, I didn't put it, but through you to Ken. Ken, I thought I heard you say in the last little while you've been out at 468 doors through you?
Through the deputy mayor, yes. Coming from the last meeting where the citizens complained about specific neighborhoods, we actually took that information, went directly out to the community and did an educational program where we handed out pamphlets and knocked on people's doors, told them their responsibility.
So this is above and beyond your normal duties from the snow officers, enforcement officers?
Through the deputy mayor, that is correct. We actually used our student team that actually focus a lot on the Westdale and Mohawk area to help go after this public education.
Sorry, so they focused on the whole city, knocking on doors, but they're the students you use in Westdale, Mohawk. You didn't just knock on 468 doors in Westdale and Mohawk through you.
Through the deputy mayor, that's correct. We took the problem areas that were identified and we did door-to-door in those specific neighborhoods.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, what happens when nobody's home? What do we do there in a reach out like this?
Through the deputy mayor, we have actually door hangers that we put on so that at least the information is there with the resident so they understand their responsibility under the bylaw.
And how about on those construction sites? Probably half the photos we saw came from the smallest ward footprint, Ward 2 delegates the other day, and certainly construction sites were the focus of one or two. So what happens there? Do you speak to the foreman? Those frequent delinquents?
Through the deputy mayor, we make every effort to make sure that we find a responsible party of the property so that we can educate them. Again, as mentioned before, if we do have a problem site, we do have a hot list that we develop for a snow removal. And if they're on that hot list, they've already been entered into our computer system as being warned, and we'd go directly to enforcement.
So I know about the hot list through you. Ken, are there frequent delinquents that remain on that hot list? As peculiar as it may be, they have no problem with just letting the snow accumulate, which often turns to the hard to navigate ice chunks and so forth, and just let the city come and bill us accordingly down the road. Do you have many of those cases where they just don't seem to comply ever and seem not to care about paying?
Through the deputy mayor, there are frequent flyers that we actually have to call the contractors out and we do enforcement on them.
So how do we get to them? How do we get through to them? Simply door knocking with students isn't going to work probably. So through you, Ken, any ideas for the immediate future?
Through the deputy mayor, the enforcement, we get the job done. So not only do we put fees for service on the property roll, but we actually have laid charges, in particular, either our provincial or our municipal bylaw offenses that we would go with Part 1 in this area. And we can actually not only lay fees for service, which is full cost recovery for our officers' time, but actually an offense and charge them for that. Our ultimate goal is to compliance, and so there are the tough ones that we have to send the contractors out, and of course that fee goes onto the tax roll too. So there is a financial burden on the individuals that do not want to comply, but hopefully, the message is that it's important to do this for all our citizens.
I'm just saying, it seems to me there's a few properties where the financial burden isn't considered a burden at all. And so I'm wondering if there's something we can do in the immediate through you, Mr. Chair, and maybe Ken and I can have a sidebar following today's meeting that addresses if there's no compliance and there's those properties where nobody wants to comply, and the fines and the city put in the job on the tax roll is not an issue for those particular property owners. We got to figure out a way, I think, and I'm wondering if you agree, Ken, of getting to clear those sidewalks sooner rather than later, because the current system could be days and days. First you order, then you wait your 24 hours for the compliance of the order. That doesn't happen, and then we put them on the queue to go do it ourselves. How can we speed up that process for those frequent delinquents?
Through the deputy mayor, once an order's been given, it stays open. So if in fact we have a second offense or a second snow event, we don't have to give them another order. We can directly go to enforcement. So we can go to enforcement, we can call the contractors in. And if we find a frequent flyer, we use progressive enforcement. And so if the Part 1 fine doesn't work, we can actually go to a Part 3 and force them into court and bring the matter before a justice of the peace to seek a more substantial fine.
Right, but back to the sidewalks though, how does that help us get the sidewalks going forward for these individuals, the few individuals that don't seem to care about costs or courts or fines or, compliance orders? How do we get to those sidewalks more consistently, more frequently?
Through the deputy mayor, not only are they on the hot list, but once an order's been given, we can actually send contractors immediately. So, of course, we're caught on how busy the contractors are, so we try to get them as quick as possible. But we'll use every effort that we have or every ability that we have to address those problems.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Can you pass your chair there, Ken, to, I see John McLennan's here. I got a quick question for him based on his expertise in risk management and on that 600,000 average in payouts on slips and falls. John, I guess there's a little criteria attached to that. So do we have a breakdown on, 600K, is that slip and falls on snow that wasn't shoveled? Or are there different criteria under that payout?
Through the chair, in situations where we've actually compensated, it's important to remember that all that $600,000 is, a lot of it goes into investigation, or some of it goes into investigation. But when we do pay, it's a situation where we felt we are negligent. So it's a situation generally where we've established that there's ice or a slippery condition on the sidewalk after 48 hours.
Okay, and so it is, we have slip and fall payouts for other conditions, but this is specific 600K costs that include investigation, as you noted, related to snow and ice.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
And what's the breakdown on a 600K on average, if you don't have the number, but how much of 600K annually in 10 years on average is investigation costs versus payouts?
This would simply be off the top of my head, and I can.
That's okay.
We can talk later, and I can give you an exact figure. I'd say it's probably a 70-30 split. 70 being damages, 30 being investigation.
And in your many years of outstanding service and risk management, when do we reach a ceiling? When is it that John McLennan says to the appropriate staff, whether it's enforcement or public works and clearing, that we got an issue here? Or do you leave that in council's hands? We're paying too much on slips and falls for the investigations and the payouts. We ought to address this situation. Is that something you can answer here today, John?
Through the chair, yeah, I can answer it. I mean, we're constantly meeting with Public Works on any number of issues, and sidewalk snow clearing is certainly one of them. I think, as a risk manager, there's a financial analysis of situations, and there's maybe what you'd call a moral analysis of situations. And I think it's, you're asking me, I think, to editorialize a bit here, but
yeah, that's
the financial case probably is not there when you look at the payouts and when you look at the cost of clearing sidewalks. So when you say, do we leave it to council, I think that's when I and staff would defer and say, what, do you want to move beyond the financial here?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I appreciate that answer. Dan, I'm curious, and because it appeared today in this 9-page report, Mr. Chair, and you're fine shutting me down here because mine is more generally budgetary, and I have to admit that one of the things I've been thinking about, and I've talked to a number of my colleagues about since this issue came back to us, initially a motion move March of 2019, and you know, we're limited on, I think, on what we can work with on the report back, with no offense to anybody, it's just a lot going on, I guess. But when we're concerned about costs, we're rightly concerned about sitting at 3.4 or 5 right now, and I think all of us would like to see us south of 3. So through you to Dan, in this exercise, have we ever looked at offsetting instead of adding additional tax burden? And from a lens of, you know, current public works operational costs, even the big picture stuff, what we, for example, pay to cut lawns. And then what we're seeing from an environmental point of view, at least I am in my own front and backyard, very much less frequency in lawn cutting. Are we adjusting budgets accordingly, or budgets for those big picture items that we might be able to reduce and allocate those funds towards a program like this? Has that been investigated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the way I'd answer that is to say we have levels of service for everything we do, whether it's cutting grass in parks or, you know, how many boardings we need to have on a bus route. And so I would say the vast majority of those levels of service are council approved. So if we were going to alter them, we would need council direction to do that. And, you know, specifically with some of the weather events that we've seen recently, it's actually increased the need for grass cutting as a result of the grass growing so quickly in the spring. So I think we're really talking about a service level conversation, and we would be looking to council to direct us one way or another if we're going to amend those service levels.
Okay, well, fine. And one last question to this point, through you to Dan or Edward. So we had some good questions earlier about service levels just on roads. I think I heard and I think I recall that we meet Regulation 23902, minimum standards from the Act, the Ontario Act we're governed by, and it's 8 centimeters through you on most, is it arterials or residentials on the 8 centimeters?
Sorry, through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor. What I was referring to was the roadways themselves. So in terms of clearing the roadways, we do meet minimum maintenance standards. And in terms of the sidewalks that we currently plow, we do meet minimum maintenance standards for those sidewalks that we do.
So I wanted to get some clarity on that. So through you, Chair, to Edward, we don't just meet standards on roads. We here in Hamilton, it's my understanding, we start Mr. Plow up a little earlier than a lot of our comparator municipalities. Is that correct, through you, Chair?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor, the city meets the standards for the majority of the roadways. The one area where we exceed the minimum maintenance standard is the residential roadways. The standard there in most municipalities is snowpack, and it was a council-approved change, I believe, 4 or 5 years ago, where the standard on residential roadways is bare pavement. So that is an exceedance of the minimum maintenance standards.
Through you, what did that great idea cost us 5 years ago? Annually.
Through you, through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor, staff did look at that service level, and in terms of if we were to only meet the minimum maintenance standards, it would be a reduction of approximately $500,000 a year.
Okay, and then just so I'm clear, and if you don't have the answer, we can talk offline, but I'm just curious again, going back to road clearing. So at what, on Main Street here, through you, Chair, at what level of centimeters do we start up the plows?
On priority one road,
Arterials,
priority roadways such as the Link, Scartman crossings, our target response is between 2.5 and 5 centimeters, and that's to be completed within 4 hours.
In our comparators, have we looked at what is it 2.5 to 5 for pretty much everybody?
Through the Deputy Mayor, those are in line with the minimum maintenance standards. So we don't necessarily exceed minimum maintenance standards. We meet them on higher class roadways.
On higher, sorry?
On higher class roadways like priority 1s and 2s.
So on minor arterials and residential, how do we compare to our comparators? When do we go out? Sooner than most?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, it is a mix on residential roadways from different municipalities, but I would say that we go out earlier and we have a higher standard.
So have we done any cost comparisons on the fact that we go earlier with this higher standard? If we were to go and land in an area that's equivalent to most of our comparators, what the savings would be, or what reallocated operational funds we might contemplate? Final question, by the way. Thank you for the time. Edward, do we have that anywhere?
To the deputy mayor, to the councillor, we would have to do a more in-depth analysis on that. The aspect that we looked at was the bare pavement versus snowpack, because that's related to materials, and that was the 500,000 that I quoted earlier.
Okay.
And that question is part of our operational budget discussion if we want to have that in full.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor. First, Mr. Plow reference. I'm surprised it took this long to come up. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thankfully, some of my questions have already been answered, but I do have a couple. So through you to Mike Zagarek, the figures that you provided for Ward 9, I would like to have for Ward 13, not at this moment. You do not have to sit there and figure it out at this moment, but I did ask for them at the last meeting. I don't have them. I would like to have those figures for Ward 13 so that I can determine at least what the figure might look like for the urban area, so the former town of Dundas, for Ward 13. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Edward. Edward, can you please tell me in the information update that you provided, you said the total number of sidewalk kilometers is 2,403, 2,397 kilometers in the urban area and are listed below by ward. The list below, is that for the urban area only, or is that the total number of sidewalk kilometers?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, I believe that is for the 2403, so that is all the sidewalk kilometers.
So I would like to have from you what that is for the urban area only in Ward 13, please. You don't have to give that to me right now, but I'd like you to send that to me. And while I'm at it, since Councillor Jackson brought it up, I would like to recognize the great job that the staff in my ward do for us with snow plowing. They do a great job, and that's Sarah Poole and Andy McNichol and Mark Priest and Gerard Johnson. And I'm sure that if we go to sidewalk clearing, they'll equally supervise that as well. But I do have a, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but I'm going to say that as I've listened here, we've talked about, urban and rural and area rating and not area rating. I would like to know from somebody, if I were to area rate to the former municipality of Dundas, which is the only way I can area rate, is to the former municipality. We don't really have much rural area, if any, in the, oh, I do, I have a little bit. But the urban area in the former municipality of Dundas got snow plowing of their sidewalks. Is that as complicated? And let's say we decided not to do it on a general levy. Can I area rate to the former municipality of Dundas snow clearing of those sidewalks in the urban area? I don't know who can answer that one.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the short answer is yes. And so that is our methodology that we apply as it relates to Ancaster. So it is based on former municipality, and that captures beyond Ward 12. It captures Ward 14. It's part of Ward 14 as well. So part of Ward 14 also pays for snow clearing. And I'm not sure if it captures any other wards. So again, that is our methodology that we apply for Ancaster, And with respect to scenario 3, if it was to be urban rural, if you were to area rate it, the average impact to an urban property would be $22 for Ward 13. So for Ward 13, under scenario 3, area rated, the average impact for an urban property would be $22.
So thank you. So through you, I think General Manager McKinnon wants to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one little nuance that we just want to caution about. We'd have to analyze it depending on where you wanted to terminate it based on boundaries. We would want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where one side of the street is having it and the other side isn't. So that's why we just want to caution when we because you can imagine the phone calls you might get as a result of that. So we just want to make sure that we can analyze that when we're starting to chop things up a little bit.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think I'm happy to talk about that further, but I don't think that there's much chance that anywhere but maybe one street. So, so I want to go back then through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to General Manager Zagaric. You said the former municipality of, the former Ward 14 is paying for something. Explain that to me, because the former Ward 14 is only part of the former township of Town of Flamborough. And so does that mean that 15 is actually paying for it too? And or what are we paying for? Are we paying for snow clearing in the former town of Ancaster?
Sure, hope so.
So I'm trying to figure that out, because there's not much in the way of sidewalks in Ancaster that was in former 14.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, part of Councillor Whitehead's ward does include some former properties of the town of Ancaster, and they pay their property levy includes snow clearing.
All right. So excuse me, so I misunderstood you. You're saying the current Ward 14 is paying for snow clearing in the former town of Ancaster?
Yes. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I apologize if I wasn't clear. Yes. So again, it's based on former municipality. So in the case of Ancaster, it's not limited to Ward 12. It includes some properties in the current Ward 14 boundary.
Okay, thank you. And so that leads me to the next thing. So when the border lines changed in the wards, my ward went from 6,200 acres to 65,000 acres. And the difference is the rural side of my ward. So what I'm going to tell you is that I am not on for full levy, because the rural areas in Hamilton, apparently, according to something I read this week, and I think it was attached to Glen Norton, is 80% of the geography of the city of Hamilton. 80%, and they don't have sidewalks. So they will get virtually nothing except for Waterdown in Ward 15, the former town where the sidewalks would be. I don't know about Carlisle. In my ward, a couple of sidewalks in Freelton. Greensville has a couple of sidewalks. I don't have Linden in my ward. So, but in the rural area, for the most part, there isn't a sidewalk anywhere. It's roadside ditches. So I will not be on for general levy. That means that Flamborough will pay $22. So I am interested in knowing what it would cost so that my community can know what it would cost per $358,000 of assessment for them to have sidewalk clearing. So if I can have that figure, and if you think it's $22 under scenario 3, I'd like to know what it is under scenario 2. Anyway, if you can give that to me offline, I'm happy to have a discussion offline. But I did want to put that out there, that 80% of the city will be paying for something that they will not get any value out of at all. Thank you.
Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. And I was just
You just knocked me off.
I want to ask risk manager, I heard there were 613 winter falls this year. Was it this year only? This year was 613?
No, sorry, through the chair, the average payment, or the total payment we make on an annual basis over the last 10 years has been 613,000.
Okay, so can we assume that the slips and fall will decrease, or do you think it might increase because the city's taking more liability of the sidewalks?
Through the chair, I don't know that I could answer that now. I've heard theories that have said if the city's doing it, then the property owners aren't likely to do it. Even if they're doing it now, they're maybe just going to rely on the city. I don't think that would happen. I think slip and falls are always going to happen. I don't know that the number of claims will go down. Our ability to defend will improve.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the expectation is a lot higher for the city to make sure the sidewalks are done properly. The main complaints, again, and I think our city does a great job, is, road clearance. And yet I have a lot of complaints that said they're not doing it properly, they're not doing it fast enough, they are not doing courts. My emails keep on and on about that every time there's a snowstorm. So I'm just wondering, I heard that we have to wait till it's 8 centimeter, and that's maybe Ed Solder could clarify that. It says it's 48 hours. That's a long time to have snow on those sidewalks. And if it stops for maybe an hour and it starts again, we have to wait another 48 hours. Is that what I'm hearing? I just wanted to be clear.
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, that's correct. The standard, that's in the minimum maintenance standards, is 8 centimeters, 48 hours after the snowfall ends. Do we normally send out crews in the time frame in between? On the roadways we do, because we don't allow it to accumulate to that sort of depth. But the standards that we're trying to meet is that.
Right. So it seems such a long time, so there could be more expectation for the city to do it quicker after, and more calls come in, and why isn't my sidewalk? So I'm just concerned about that. I did have a lot of calls saying, $17, $9, that's nothing, let's do it. So those figures seem to be appealing to all my constituents, that if we could pay max $17, why not do it? It's worth it. So those are my questions. But I have another question to Mr. Soldo. You said something about, and I think Councillor Jackson brought it up, about the equipment, right? Can you explain what kind of equipment it is that we're going to buy for $6 million if we don't?
To the deputy mayor, to the councillor, that was used as a figure. For example, if we were to do that service in-house, that is not what we're proposing. We're proposing to have contractors to do that.
Right.
So it would be the smaller plows that would be able, they have a plow that's about 1.5 meters wide.
Right. So do you think with the climate change crisis we're having, all these little, whatever they're called, bobcat that go, what kind of emission would they give out? Have we looked at that? I'm just wondering.
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, currently today we do not run vehicles along the sidewalk. So introducing that service, if it wasn't an electric vehicle, we would be introducing emissions.
Right. So should we find out how many more of these little trucks that are going around as soon as it snows? Should we get a figure before we decide? Like I said before, a lot of people honestly called me. You got to do it. It's only $9. It's only $17. And I go, okay. Actually, I got an email demanding that we do it now because of the figure being so low. So I just want to make sure we are in a climate crisis, and we're going to add all these little trucks going down every time it snows down the sidewalk. So should we get a study done, or not a study, but something so we know how much emission goes?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, certainly if council directed us to do that, we could try to evaluate that. I guess the challenge would be understanding how people are clearing their sidewalks now. I suspect that the use of a snow blower by an individual is probably tougher on the environment than having something that is more efficient. I'm not sure if there's any studies that exist out there, but we could certainly do a scan.
Right.
Councillor?
Well, thank you very much. It's just a couple of questions. As we talk about it, more questions come out, and I think we have to get it right, but I understand all the delegates that came, they were wonderful. Of course there's concern. We're all concerned about that, and we want to be a city that cares about it, but let's try to get more answers so that we can move on. Thanks.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've been quietly sitting by listening to all this but I keep hearing Ancaster being referenced, and I thought I'd just take a minute and give you the Ancaster perspective. Well, thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Time's up.
First of all, through you to Mike, I think Ancaster's area rated by urban rural. And of course, part of Ward 14 was the old Scenic Woods, which was in Ward 12, so it would have received that the sidewalk clearing on the arterial road. So the rural area is not paying for sidewalk clearing, and about 70% of Ancaster is rural. Another thing is that it's interesting. I actually took it to my community council, should we get rid of sidewalk clearing? And let me tell you the problem. I take a lot of heat on this. First of all, on the west side of 403, which is I called Old Ancaster, all the residential roads are rural cross-section. So not only do they not have sidewalks, they don't have curbs. They got ditches. And so there's no sidewalk removal done in Old Ancaster. If you go to the east side of 403, the original Meadowlands, as far west as, say, Meadowbrook, was done before the new AODA rules come in. And Ancaster at that time only did sidewalks on arterial roads. So you'll see Meadowlands has, Stonehenge has sidewalks, Kitty Murray has sidewalks. But when you go further east to Cloverleaf, that's when the new AODA rules come in, and even courts get sidewalks. So there's a terrible inequity. The urban area is all paying for sidewalk clearing, but a good chunk of it doesn't get any. And it was originally put in place to plow the arterials, primarily Wilson Street, because most homes on Wilson back onto Wilson, and there the city has to do it anyway, even in all 15 wards. But there's other problems that your office will hear about if you do snow clearing. The operators in the middle of the night are driving down a sidewalk that's 5 feet wide with a 5-foot blade. They can't tell exactly where the sidewalk is, and they tend to drift and rip up sod. They knock the daylights out of me, the constituents. Your guy ripped up my sod, you better get somebody back here to fix it. Or the homeowner decides they're going to put a sprinkler system in, and the contractor puts it right up against the sidewalk, even though it's on city property, and bang, knock off the sprinkler heads. And I get all kinds of calls about that. And so there's inequities and there's problems. And so my message to you is be careful what you ask for, because you could run into issues similar to what I'm experiencing. And I've actually given serious thought to just discontinue sidewalk clearing in Ancaster for those reasons, because it just creates too many problems for us and too many phone calls and too many emails. So it's the inequity, the damage to the sod, and the damage to the sprinkler heads is my problem. I'm also puzzled as I listened to the last few days about sidewalk debate, and it primarily came from the Lower City, is people with mobility devices can't get around. I didn't hear much from the general public. I heard from people with mobility devices, and those that delegated here were in mobility devices. But what struck me is we're paying 60% more over the last 3 years for darts. These people could get door-to-door service by darts because they're in a mobility device, and they pay the exact same price as they pay to go on the bus. And then when I asked a delegate that, his answer was, I hate darts. And so where's the equity in that? You know, we're paying this huge amount of money. Every time Dan goes up there, he wants another $2 million for darts. because of ridership going up, and of course, our county or our audit department is taking a look at the eligibility side, and they're going to be reporting back to us. So if the problem is just mobility devices, we have a service that for $2.40 will go door to door for you. And so you need to think about that. And the other,
No shouting.
and I think you need, I think Councillor Paul's hit something that I've been thinking about for a long time. There's a number of members of council that keep pushing the climate change issue on us. Now you're going to put 150 new machines, whatever the number is, out there plowing sidewalks, putting emissions out. And secondly, I heard similar members of council saying, we've had the warmest January since in history. You look out the window, there's not much snow out there. And so you're doing this when we don't get much snow anymore. And I'm looking out the window now and I don't see any snow on sidewalks or even a windrow where it was cleaned off and pushed off. So we got to think this through and make sure that we're doing the right thing for everybody, not just any one special interest group. And, strollers came from the audience is interesting question. I don't have a quick answer for that because they're not eligible to use darts. But how much do you spend if you're going to give a DART system to help people who are immobilized, and then you're going to clear the sidewalks? Principal purpose, from what I've been hearing, is for people who are in, trying to run wheelchairs or scooters down the sidewalk when they could take darts, door-to-door service. So think about that. Think about the problems I'm having clearing snow. Think about the climate change, and think about, don't we already offer service for people who have those devices, and should we really stack on another $5 million a year to do full sidewalk clearing? That's all my comments, particularly when we're just staring down a 3.5% increase.
Councillor Marula.
We're down to 3.4. Oh, you put me on by accident.
Sorry.
You put the wrong guy on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. So I'm not sure if some of you remember, back in 2005, I brought forward the motion for sidewalk clearing. And it was a very lively debate at the time. It was defeated handily.
I voted against it.
And I was angry. And but I did work with council and staff to try to mitigate what I thought was a bad decision. And we developed the Snow Angels program. And in doing so, in theory, it was a great idea, and it still is, except it's under-resourced. So I look at this issue from a social justice issue, and I look at the compliance rate presently. I know when it snows, I'm out there, I'm obsessive compulsive with it. And so is my neighbor, or so are my neighbors. I clean very, very often, and as often as possible, and quickly. And so do my neighbors, and the vast majority of the city does. And if you look at the compliance rate, in some cases, 100%. And in some cases, it is bad, but I'm not even sure what that number is. Is it 40? Is it 50%? But for the most part, I think overall, anecdotally, and staff over the years, we've ascertained that the vast majority are compliant. And there is a minority out there that aren't. And then when you divide that category up even more, and you look at the commercial and institutional aspects, that's what we should be angry at. Are that these people with the resources to do it are not doing it, and where we should be focused in on is enforcing the existing bylaw that works if it's enforced properly. And if we have to tweak it, if there's a way that we can tweak it to ensure that it has more teeth to it, then so be it. But let's not throw the water out, or the baby out with the bathwater. So, did I get that right? So, if the purpose and the objective, if the purpose of this exercise is to ensure that people have access, it's a social justice argument, then what is being proposed here is going to worsen the situation and not better it. And I learned that through just wisdom and experience for being here as long as I've been here. The other thing is a layer of complaints that we're going to create. So not only are we, as it's been mentioned, we don't have the frequency of snowfalls that we had in the past. It's inconsistent, it's unpredictable. the contractors are going to sit home and drink a lot of beer and eat a lot of cheesies and get a blank check from us for not doing absolutely nothing because we're obligated to pay them to be on call. It is nothing short, really, of irresponsible. And I say that with the greatest of respect because I know the intentions are good, but I'm telling you the outcome is going to be drastically different. And we're literally going to punish the majority who are complying, who take pride in the communal aspect of being active in their community and helping their neighbors. I give out good neighbors certificates as often as I can. A request comes in, the vast majority of times I give out these certificates. They're related to snow removal of their seniors or people with disabilities. So I'm not quite sure why we want to be punitive to the majority. It's physical activity that we should be encouraging rather than having people continue to be on their screen complaining that their sidewalk's not done. Maybe they should get off their butt, go outside, and clean the damn sidewalk because they're spending way too much time in front of a screen and the obesity rates in the city are through the roof. So when we put all the pros and cons together and you look at the social justice argument, what's being presented here is we're going to be throwing good money to actually make the situation worse, and there's no justice in making the situation worse when you have the vast majority complying. So, where do we go from here? I'd like to, after I'm supporting Mayor Eisenberger's motion, I think it's important that we include ways of looking at the bylaw to ensure that it has much more teeth. If you recall, years ago, I brought forward a motion regarding proactive graffiti enforcement. We now have that on our budget books for, it went as a pilot project, it's now being proposed as a permanent project. We're going to have these staff members there that are proactively out there enforcing the graffiti bylaw. Why not expand their mandate to include snow and winter as well? So, see, that's the kind of avenue we should be taking. Not just throw money at something and victimize the majority and reward the minority who are either lazy or have the resources to not do it. And those that don't have the resources or are seniors or not capable of doing it, we need to stand up and be counted for and improve that service. But we have an existing service. So folks, we have all the answers before us. We just need to tweak them, not throw money at something just for the sake of doing it and claiming it's going to improve it when you know very well it isn't. And Councillor Ferguson just confirmed that. It opens up a whole other layer of bureaucracy that's going to cost us through our ears in liability. So let's act responsibly. Let's support Mayor Eisenberger's motion, which I think is a sage approach to this. Let's have an independent assessment of the actual problem in reality, not anecdotally. And we have 600,000 people in the city. Granted, the 20 people that did show up, I applaud them. But they don't represent 600,000 people in the city. So to claim that those 20 people do is really a stretch. I respect everything they've said. I've supported everything they've said. And when we're dealing with accessibility, I've been working with people with disabilities since grade 7. I don't know if anybody, I don't know how many times I've told this story, but I was an educational assistant by trade, then went into addictions. But my start in accessibility for people with disabilities started literally when I was 12 years old. And it did so because I was blessed to be able to attend the Catholic school system in Hamilton that was integrating students with people that had disabilities, not segregating them like other public board, like the public board. So we were far more advanced. And when we were advanced in grade 7, I was an elevator personified. Imagine this today. I was the guy, no matter what, had to meet Judy, and her name was Judy. I won't give her her last name. But she had thalidomide, is that what how it's pronounced? And her first name was Judy. So I used to have to meet her every day at 8:15 and carry her up the stairs. Talk about how undignified that is from an accessibility standpoint. But the lesson learned was more about me and the lesson I learned than it was about Judy. And God bless Judy. And all these years that I think back to, and just recently I ran into an old schoolmate from St. Margaret Mary, and it was Doug MacArthur's grade 7 class. And at that time, it was just something that, oh, good kid, Sam's carrying this disabled kid up the stairs. But think about this from a global perspective, how advanced that school was at the time to have that person included. The negative part was the bricks and mortar aspect. So don't tell me about accessibility issues or people or dealing with people with disabilities, because when you look at my history of working with students with disabilities, working on path employment and employing people with disabilities, and then I have people making allegations that I'm laughing at that, it's just beyond the pale. It's laughable in itself, especially when you consider the source of where it came from. Talk about shining up a tinfoil hat. But it was so insulting and humorous at the same time, I had to ignore it. I'm getting used to do that, by the way, with all the nonsense going on in the city. Nobody laughed at anybody marginalized. They were laughing at spending money that's actually going to be an injustice to the people with disabilities rather than justice. And for that, I say, let's move forward with the sage approach that the mayor has taken, and let's stop the nonsense, and let's work towards collectively supporting the majority of residents who are doing the right thing, rather than the minority who are doing the wrong thing. Appreciate your time.
So my second-time speakers list is a little bit out of order, so it's Mayor Eisenberger first, Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Nan and Councillor Wilson. So I'm going to come to Mayor Eisenberger.
I mean, I'm tempted to move that we remove sidewalk snow clearing in Ancaster to put you out of your misery, but I'm not sure that'll solve any problems. That was a joke. But I will put forward the motion, and the motion reads, so item A in the original recommendation, that the staff expand existing communications initiatives regarding winter storm activities to include additional information about